how we enter it. I read that
Okay.
you were doing a lot of work, like you said, with frontline workers and COVID over the pandemic and things like that. And I would just like to hear more about your experience and what you saw. Like there is a bit of like, we're seeing hospitalizations that are higher now in kids in 2022 than they were in the last 2 years combined. And,
Right.
there are no mitigation measures to stop people from getting infected. And then, so COVID's kind of like, it doesn't exist until it does. And people are kind of dealing with these things in silence. And so I was wondering what your experience was during the last couple of
Yeah,
years.
well, at the, in the first few months or a year, really, I head up clinically a trauma team. We work with first responders. So, the first responder definition depends on what the trauma or tragedy is. So in this case, it was a lot of the medical personnel. And at the
Right.
beginning, just such high levels of helplessness and feeling like they couldn't help their patients survive. And also, there was a lot of betrayal trauma, feeling like they weren't getting the support they needed from the administrations because everybody was the
Hmm.
healthcare system wasn't set up for, so there was helplessness, there's guilt, um, massive amount of stuck mourning. Um, so these are some of the things that we were dealing with at the beginning. And we also worked with EMTs. They had to go into the homes alone. And in all these responders, firefighters, EMTs, going into the homes with all of the equipment, maybe not having enough equipment. Their regular system of working was different. They had to leave bodies where they would have never attended to. But so there just a lot
A
of
lot.
trauma on that level for the responders. Um, the toll, I think luck history will tell the story, but we're beginning to see. I feel like everybody is walking around with a hum of the feeling of threat. And that's not good for the body, you know. And you know what? There was threat for a long time, but now, even though the threat's reduced with the vaccinate, all of
Hmm.
that, severe illness, I had COVID at the very beginning in March 2020. And I had to get EMDR for it because when I had that breathing thing, I never was hospitalized, but I
Right.
thought I was going to die. And that ended up to be very transgenerational in my EMDR because of the Holocaust survivors, not, the Auschwitz, not survivors, the people who
Right.
were killed in Auschwitz and they could, in concentration camps and not being able to breathe and dying. So, my associations went back transgenerationally, but it also linked to
Wow.
wind and breath in Hebrew is ruach, and ruach also means spirit. And so, my brain was kind of working on integrating all of that good stuff that's associated with breath and spirit. But I think everybody's walking around with a hum of some anxiety and whatever they were particularly prone to before. Were they somebody who tackled adversity head on, um, or were they somebody who kind of turned their head? But in any event, not seeing people, the social impact of not seeing people, not visually. I know for me, I'm an extrovert
Hmm.
and I also have like some ADD that I don't treat, but it kind of I've compensated for. But like not seeing all these different things every day on my way to work, it affects you. It affects your brain,
Right.
for a lot of people. And then those poor school kids, where it's developmentally so important for them socially,
Sure.
especially in this era of social media, to be out there and how that affected their brains and their sense of self. So I can go on, but I
Mhm.
think the chapter remains to be written, but I think we're getting a peak
I
that
never
people
thought
aren't
about that.
doing well.
How you
People
said
aren't doing
about
well.
the children that not just were they not with their schoolmates interacting, but now even earlier they've probably adapted more to being on the phone, which is so detrimental.
Right.
uh, because that was their only lifeline for
Right.
connection. Like traveling around as I have, not recently, but before the pandemic, if I was living on my own, for example, I would be a little bit isolated. My phone would be my lifeline to my friends and
Right.
family and everyone that
Right.
I love and loves me. And so,
Right.
in even today, I have to be very conscious to not be on the phone too often, because like I will spend
Yeah.
more time just on the phone chatting randomly than like living the parts of my life that I actually want to live in person. So it's been something that I've worked on. So I can
Right.
imagine if you're if you're under 10 years old and all of a sudden you spent 2 years on your device. Wow, I didn't consider that.
Right. Who begins to know how that's going to affect us, affect
Right.
these kids, or whether people's innate resiliency will come into effect when you go back into life, if, but I don't know. I mean, I know in my fields and also with the responders that we worked on with our team early on, there was a lot of moral injury, meaning, having to make decisions about who gets the respirator or not. And now
What a nightmare.
we, and now, um, therapists, for example, um, we can't, we're getting calls. We can't see people. Everybody's full. It's a mental health crisis. And there is a sort of moral injury. Every time I can't see somebody, I try to help them find a referral, but then this one's full. I mean, and that's like a little example. So, but I'm just saying
Right.
everybody is struggling. Everybody's struggling. And I think COVID, because of the time alone and, the usual ways that you cope with life, some of them were taken away. Stuff that wasn't dealt with is coming more to the surface.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that with us. I'm sure some people will at least feel better to know that everyone has this hum, and it's not just them that thinks
Right.
life is still weirder
Right.
and more
Right.
uncomfortable than it was in
Yeah.
2019,
Yeah. Yeah.
for example.
Normalize it. And if you can, seek some treatment. It doesn't have to be long term. EMDR doesn't have, not a long term treatment. So, better to clear out what's there and stuck.
Yeah, yeah, the cobwebs, the dust, the emotional dust that builds.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.